Hey, my name is Brooklyn Clayton, and for my literacy assignment, I decided to read The Disappearing Spoon by Kean. This whole book is chock full of chemistry on every single page. The whole book goes through the periodic table, which was actually super interesting, and I learned a ton. But the points that I decided to highlight and what stuck out the most to me was everything that kind of related to the medical field, because that's what I'm going into, and that's going to be my career. And I currently work as a CNA, so a lot of it I saw kind of related to it. Well, of course, like chemistry relates a ton to the medical field, but what I saw that related to my life right now, I thought was super interesting. But the author starts off in his introduction talking about his obsession with mercury ever since he was a little kid. And when he was little, they had one of the little mercury thermometers, and he talked about how one day when it broke and he watched his mom put all the little beads back together before putting it in another glass container. He just talked about how he was like so fascinated by it, and his whole introduction is just him learning about mercury and how, even though it was super interesting and fascinating, one day he found out it was super toxic and poisonous. He was like, what? He's like, that's crazy. Why are we sticking it in a glass vial and putting it in our mouth? But I was like, yeah, that is kind of weird. But he had a little spot in here, and it says, as toxic as swallowing mercury is, its fumes are worse. They fry the wires in the central nervous system and burn holes in the brain, much as advanced Alzheimer's does. And I was like, I know what that looks like, advanced Alzheimer's. I'm like, I work in the memory care unit at my job a lot, so I'm like, I totally know what that looks like. So I thought that was crazy that its fumes are a lot worse than just swallowing mercury, which I thought was super interesting. Anyhow, he goes on to talk about the periodic table and how it's made up of everything and whatnot, but I love this part that he said in it, when he's talking about the periodic table and telling you everything that you can find in it. The little part at the bottom right here says, the periodic table, it poisons people, it spawns wars between hydrogen at the top left and the man-made impossibilities lurking along the bottom. You can find bubbles, bombs, money, petty politics, history, poison, crime, love, and even some science, which I thought was super cool, because I thought about it and I was like, I can totally see every single one of those things he just said on the periodic table, but never once in my life would I have ever looked at it that way. So I thought that was super interesting. Another part over here, he was talking about silicon dioxide, which was actually, I don't know, this whole section was really interesting. But I highlighted like a lot on this page right here. But so I gotta try and put my words together here. But he talked about workers, like construction workers who do sandblasting and inhale glass dust. The silicon dioxide from that can actually, okay, how do I put this into better wording here? Okay, kind of backtracking here, but my boyfriend's grandpa does like fiberglass, so that's why I thought this kind of related to me, because I could totally see that, and how he actually has a lot of lung problems now because of probably inhaling that silicon dioxide, which I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that, because I didn't even know it until now, but crazy. It says because our lungs regularly deal with carbon dioxide, they see nothing wrong with absorbing its cousin, silicon dioxide, which can be fatal. So I was like, oh my gosh, like that's crazy to me. I don't know, maybe I'm just kind of crazy, but I thought that was so insane. And how it was saying people who inhale glass dust, and my boyfriend's grandpa does fiberglass, so I was like, I wonder if that could be a reason why his lungs aren't amazing, but I don't know, I should ask. So that was super interesting. And then there's this whole section over here that talked about how x-rays came to be invented. So this, I won't read any of it because it's super long, but I thought it was super interesting how he like accidentally discovered x-rays, and how when he did, he thought he'd gone mad and he was seeing hallucinations, which makes totally sense, because if you saw your bones for the first time, you'd be like, oh no, I'm crazy. But for us, we were like, oh yeah, that's an x-ray, like totally normal. But back then, that totally makes sense that they freaked out. And the guy who discovered it, he actually had his wife, her name's Bertha, she's so funny, come down and put her hand in front of like the screen, and she could see her bones, and she freaked out. Which, of course, because that's like super weird back then and it's not a normal thing. But she thought it was like a little, oh, what's the word I'm looking here? She thought it was like a little sign like about her death and that she was gonna die soon. So she like freaked out and like refused to go back into his lab ever again. But super interesting how that all came to be. And there's the little picture of her hand that he kept and her ring on it, which is right there. But I thought that was super interesting and super cool, how that came to be discovered and how everyone had thought he'd gone mad, because of course it's weird and not normal. But for us, it's just daily life. You go to the hospital and you get an x-ray. It's just kind of basic things. For my last point that I'm going to talk about here, it was talking about how when they were discovering ink and how they actually got it to, what's the word I'm looking for? It didn't just dry on the papers, it was actually absorbed into the paper. So it said, ink for that first time in penmanship history dried not by evaporation while sitting on the paper, but by penetrating into the paper's fibers, drying via absorption in an instant. Which I thought was so cool, because I was like, I never once thought about it evaporating before. I just always knew that it was being absorbed into the paper. So, I don't know, I thought that was super interesting too. So, those are a couple of my favorite points that I've seen in this book, and there's a million more that I could show you, and the whole book is highlighted. But if you have any more questions about the book, feel free to shoot me an email or message me, and I'll be happy to tell you more about it.